Japanese encephalitis. It's causing a lot of concern in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. It's what's called an arbovirus infection spread by mosquitoes and has made an extraordinary jump of thousands of kilometres south. So what's going on? Well, to tell us, Associate Professor Greg Devine, who's an expert in arboviruses at the Queensland Institute of Medical Research in Brisbane. Welcome to the Health Report, Greg.
Good afternoon.
So this is a virus that occasionally comes into the Torres Strait, common in Southeast Asia, literally thousands of kilometres. What's going on?
Well, I think, as you say, it's in Asia. It's a very common disease there, causes 80,000 symptomatic cases per year, probably tens of millions potentially of infections per year, because only a very few number of those infections actually go on to be to cause symptomatic disease, which of course can have terrible consequences for human health. But so yes, it was here in the middle of the 1990s. Identified in the outer islands of the Torres Strait, and then later on the Queensland mainland and Cape York. And then there was a case in the Northern Territory in 2021 as well. So there's been a very few cases, but we certainly know that the virus has been circulating in North Australia for quite a long time. And Japanese encephalitis has been on the radar for quite some time. And it has very similar sort of ecologies to other endemic Australian viruses. There's something called Murray Valley encephalitis, which is extremely similar, and which is also associated with outbreaks in La Nina years. So Murray Valley encephalitis was here in 1974 and 2011, and here we've got another La Nina and a very similar virus circulating.
So wet weather. Now, the natural life cycle is through migratory birds, mosquitoes, migratory birds, back to migratory birds, and then it escapes.
Yes, the sequence tends to be, first of all, migratory birds, and then spilling over into the pig population. And the pig population is really important because the pig is an extremely good animal for amplifying the virus into kind of very, very high titers in the pig body. And that means that mosquitoes can then take the virus from the pig and then transfer it onto humans. So it tends to be humans are the last in the spillover cycle to get it, and so they tend to be at the end of the season. And I think that's where we are now.
So humans, horses, cattle, we're called dead ends because, unlike malaria, we don't pass it back to mosquitoes.
That's right. So humans are not going to transmit the virus, and neither are horses, although both can have very serious disease as a result of infection, although rarely. So it's pigs which are the really important thing here. And of course, Australia has an awful lot of feral pigs as well, and they're probably quite an important part of the picture in this current outbreak.
And the main symptoms?
The main symptoms of Japanese encephalitis are that initially they have fever, aches and pains. They're similar to a whole number of other viral outbreaks or viral diseases, but then they can be much more serious once it becomes an encephalitis and the swelling of the brain. Then you can have nervous disorders, disorientation. And when it gets very serious, that can lead to convulsions and even, of course, tragically, to death.
Particularly in young kids and older people. Will it become endemic in the way it's become endemic in Asia?
Well, I think it's here to stay. So I think now that it's been discovered across huge areas of southern Australia, it probably means that it's been here for a while and we just haven't seen it. I suspect that our surveillance operations have failed to some extent, and that's probably something understandably to do with the fact that everybody's been focused on COVID for the last couple of years. But I think it's certainly here to stay. It would be, I think the way to find out, of course, is to do a very intensive surveillance of all the piggeries in Australia and also looking at the feral pig population as well. But I think if we find that it continually turns up, it's the case that the pigs in the piggeries and feral pigs have all seroconverted to Japanese encephalitis, then I think we assume that it's here to stay. I mean, just because Murray Valley encephalitis isn't picked up very often doesn't mean that it's disappeared. It just means it's kind of hidden in the wildlife reservoir.
Can you immunise pigs against it?
You can. There are pig vaccines, but they're not particularly useful necessarily. South Korea has a huge program of pig vaccination, which it's been doing for about 30 years. But the problem with that is that we tend to slaughter pigs very young. So by 8 months old, most pigs are going to the abattoir. So that means that the vaccination program has only a very limited impact on transmission. It might be a perfectly good way of protecting breeding sows and boars, but it doesn't make a great deal of difference in terms of transmission. So the best thing is vaccinating the human population.
But presumably only the human population is going to come in contact with the pigs or in rural areas.
Yes, well, I think that's why the surveillance of piggeries and feral pigs is so important, because it would give people an idea of what the distribution of the disease is. The vector of Japanese encephalitis can fly tremendous distances, so perhaps 2 kilometres a day. So if you're thinking about
this is the Culex mosquito.
That's correct. That's Culex amniorostris, which is a really good vector of a lot of different viruses. But yeah, big dispersal distances. So it means that the kind of the potential catchment area in terms of risk of transmission to humans is probably a few kilometres from a piggery.
You mentioned Murray Valley encephalitis. There's another really nasty arbovirus called West Nile. And it caused a lot of problems and deaths in the United States. And I'm told it has been detected further south in Australia. I'm
not aware that the particular variant of West Nile virus that causes severe disease in other parts of the world is here. We have our own form, a subtype called Kunjun, which is occasionally very pathogenic in horses. But there's a perceived wisdom that says that because our variant of West Nile virus, which is called Kunjun, is widespread across the whole of Australia, that may be affording us some protection against West Nile virus, in that if West Nile virus was to come in, then it would have to compete with Kunjun virus for both its wildlife reservoir and also its in terms of its transmission pattern. So, yes, perceived wisdom is that West Nile virus isn't a huge threat, but of course we do need to be on our toes.
And then there's dengue, which is another story altogether. Greg, look, thank you very much indeed. Very instructive.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Associate Professor Greg Devine runs the Mosquito Control Laboratory at the Queensland Institute of Medical Research. And did you notice he's both Scottish and pronounces encephalitis the right way, Tegan?
Well, I'm going to say it the wrong way. And what I got from that is public health emergency. It's really a big deal. But for individuals, protecting yourself from Japanese encephalitis with a C virus also protects you from other mosquito-borne diseases, like things like Ross River and Murray Valley encephalitis.